The last thing my supervisor said to me before she disappeared was this: whatever you hear coming from sublevel 3, and you will hear things, you do not investigate. You do not call anyone. You do not even look in that direction. You clock in, you do your rounds, and you clock out. That's the job. I laughed. I thought she was pulling my leg, some kind of hazing ritual for the new night security guard. I assumed there'd be a punchline. There wasn't. By my 3rd shift, I had stopped laughing entirely. By my 7th shift, I had stopped sleeping. And by the night of my 14th shift, the night everything finally broke open, I understood why every security guard before me had either quit without explanation, requested emergency leave they never came back from, or in one case I later found buried in an old HR file, simply never been seen again. This is my account of what happened at the Harlow Institute for Applied Research. I'm recording this because I need someone to know. I'm recording this because if I disappear too, there should at least be a record. My name is Daniel Marsh. I was a night security guard. I lasted 19 days, and I should have listened. Before we go further, drop a comment right now telling us where you're watching from. Are you watching this at night? Alone? With the lights off? Let us know down below. We love hearing from our Neurofear HQ family. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and join thousands of people who have already surrendered their sleep to us. Now, let's get back to Daniel. I took the job because I needed money. Simple as that. No mystery there. My previous position at a logistics warehouse had dried up after a restructuring, and rent doesn't care about corporate downsizing. I had maybe 6 weeks of savings and a growing sense of panic when I found the listing on a staffing website. Night Security Officer, Harlow Institute for Applied Research shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Compensation $28 per hour, above market rate for the area. Requirements: clean background check, ability to work independently, no prior security experience required. The above market pay caught my eye. I'd done some reading since then, and I've learned that above market pay for an isolated night job is usually a red flag. But when you're 6 weeks from eviction, red flags look an awful lot like lifelines. The Harlow Institute was located on the eastern edge of the city, in a district that had once been an industrial corridor and was now in the early stages of being gentrified. Coffee shops sprouting up beside derelict warehouses. Art studios wedged between machine shops still in operation. The institute itself was a 7-story building of pale concrete and dark glass that looked like it had been designed to discourage curiosity. No decorative elements. No signage visible from the street beyond the small metal plate beside the main entrance. Harlow Institute for Applied Research, S. 1987. I had my orientation on a gray Tuesday afternoon with a woman named Supervisory Officer Patricia Vane. She was in her late 40s, compact and precise in the way that people who've spent years in institutional environments often become. Every movement economical, every sentence stripped of anything unnecessary. She had close-cropped silver hair and eyes the color of dishwater, and she shook my hand once with a grip that felt like a test. She walked me through the building systematically. Floors 1 through 6 housed what she described as research offices, server rooms, and laboratory spaces, all of which were off limits to security personnel unless an alarm was triggered, The corridors were clean and fluorescent lit and empty, which I attributed to the fact that we were walking them at 3 in the afternoon, well outside the nighttime hours I'd be working. Most of the research staff are out by 7, Patricia said, leading me back toward the elevator. By the time you start your shift at 10, the building is essentially yours. Essentially, I repeated. She didn't respond to that. She showed me the security booth on the ground floor, a small glass-enclosed space near the front entrance, with monitors displaying feeds from cameras positioned throughout the building. She showed me the patrol route, a loop through each floor, designed to take approximately 45 minutes per full circuit, which I was to complete twice per shift. She showed me the break room, the bathroom, the location of the first aid kit. She did not show me sub-level 3. It was only when I noticed that the elevator buttons included B1, B2, and B3, and that B3 was covered by a small strip of red tape, that I asked about it. Patricia paused, just for a moment, but I noticed it. Sub-level 3 is a decommissioned storage area, she said. It's not part of your patrol route. There's no reason for you to access it. What's stored down there? Old equipment, archive materials, nothing relevant to your duties. She resumed walking. The access door to sub-level 3 is in the east stairwell, B2 level. It's locked. You don't have a key and you won't need one. Okay, I said. And that was that. The tour ended. She handed me my ID badge, my uniform, and a laminated sheet outlining my protocols. She shook my hand again with that same testing grip. One more thing, she said as I was about to leave. I turned. Whatever you hear coming from sub-level 3, and you will hear things. You do not investigate. You do not call anyone. You do not even look in that direction. You clock in, you do your rounds, and you clock out. That's the job. I laughed. She didn't. I'm serious, Mr. Marsh, she said quietly. The Harlow Institute has protocols. Those protocols exist for good reasons. Your job is very simple. Stay on your route, monitor your screens, and under no circumstances interfere with whatever sounds you may encounter from below B2. If you follow those 3 instructions, you'll have a very boring and very well-paid job. If you don't, she stopped. If I don't, I prompted. She picked up her bag. Good luck on your first shift, she said. She walked out. I told myself she was being dramatic. I told myself every workplace has its eccentricities, its internal mythology, its senior staff rituals of intimidating the newcomers. I told myself the above-market pay was simply reflective of the unglamorous hours, not of anything sinister. I told myself a lot of things that first week. I kept telling them to myself with decreasing conviction until the 14th night. My first 6 shifts were quiet, genuinely unremarkably quiet. The Institute at night was the kind of silent that feels expensive. The hum of server cooling units, the soft click of the building settling, the distant city noise filtering in from outside like something remembered rather than heard. I did my rounds. I monitored my screens. I drank too much coffee and listened to podcasts through one earbud and counted the hours until 6 a.m. The building felt empty in a way that I found reassuring at first. No reason to be on edge, nothing to see. On my 7th shift, at approximately 1:14 a.m., I heard the first sound. I was on the 4th floor, midway through my 2nd patrol circuit, walking a corridor lined with closed office doors. When it reached me, it came from below, faint, attenuated by the concrete floors between us, but unmistakable. A knocking. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Slow enough that you couldn't mistake it for a pipe or a mechanical hiccup. The kind of tempo that fingers make when they're tapping against a surface. Knock, 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 pause, knock, 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 cut. I stopped, walking. I stood very still and listened. It continued for perhaps 15 seconds. Then it stopped. My pulse had elevated significantly without my noticing. I stood in the corridor for another minute, listening, and then reminded myself of everything I'd told myself. Building noises, old infrastructure, HVAC systems, the particular acoustic weirdness of large concrete structures at night. I resumed my patrol. I did not mention it in my shift report. The next night, at almost exactly the same time, it happened again. Same floor, same location in the corridor, same rhythmic, deliberate knocking from somewhere below. This time it lasted longer, closer to 45 seconds, and it was louder. Not dramatically louder, but enough that the increase was unmistakable, as if whatever was producing the sound had moved closer to the ceiling or further up through the floors. And this time, beneath the knocking, there was something else. A texture to the sound that I struggled to categorize. Not quite a voice, not quite a mechanical sound. Something in between, rhythmically synced to the knocking, a low, resonant vibration that I felt more in my chest than heard with my ears. I stood there for a long time. When it stopped, I went back to the security booth and I pulled up the camera feeds for B1 and B2. The cameras showed empty, fluorescent-lit corridors. I cycled through all of them 3 times. Nothing. There were no cameras for B3. I hadn't noticed that before. I checked the camera index again, carefully. B1, 4 cameras, all functional. B2, 4 cameras, all functional. B3, no entry in the system. Sub-level 3 had no surveillance coverage at all. I sat with that information for the rest of the shift. At 6 a.m., I clocked out. I drove home. I sat in my car in my building's parking lot for 20 minutes before I went inside. That night, I did not sleep well. Over the following 5 nights, I did what any rational person trying to hold on to a well-paying job does when confronted with inexplicable phenomena. I rationalized, I minimized, and I documented. The documentation was partly professional caution and partly an instinct I couldn't quite name, a sense that I should be building a record just in case. What the documentation revealed was a pattern that made the rationalizations increasingly difficult to maintain. The sounds occurred every night, always between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., always originating from below. But the nature of the sounds was changing, evolving in ways that felt purposeful rather than random. Night 8, the knocking pattern changed. It was no longer the simple 3-knock sequence. It had become more complex. Longer bursts, irregular rhythms, as if the pattern was being elaborated, built upon, like a message being composed more fluently as the sender grew confident. Night 9, the low vibration I'd first perceived beneath the knocking had become more distinct. I could now identify it as something closer to a tone, a single sustained note at the very bottom of the audible range, oscillating slightly, almost like breathing. It didn't stop when the knocking stopped. It faded gradually over the following 10 to 15 minutes. Night 10, I heard for the first time something that I can only describe as a voice. Not words, not language, but a modulation of the low tone that followed the rising and falling patterns of speech, the inflection of communication without the content. Whatever was down there, and I had by this point accepted that something was down there. It was making sounds that were organized around an intent to be heard. I went back through my documentation and charted the progression. The sounds were getting closer, not geographically. They still seemed to originate from the same sub-basement location, but louder, clearer, more complex, more structured, like something that had been far away, underwater, or buried deep, slowly approaching the surface. On night 11, I found the old HR files. If this story has you gripping your phone right now, hit the like button. It helps more people find Neurofear HQ, and make sure you're subscribed so you catch every story we drop. We post every week. You don't want to miss what's coming. The HR office was on the second floor, a small room with frosted glass panels that I passed on every patrol. The door was always closed. It had never occurred to me to try it. On night 11, for no reason I could have articulated at the time, I did. It was unlocked. Inside the room was spare and orderly. A desk, a filing cabinet, a small bookcase with binders arranged by year. The computer on the desk was off. I shouldn't have been in there. Nothing about my patrol required it. But I was in there. And the filing cabinet was right there. And the drawer labeled Personnel, Night Security was right there. And I pulled it open. There were employment files for 16 previous night security officers going back to 2019, when the Institute had apparently shifted to using direct hires rather than a staffing agency. I flipped through them quickly, scanning. The pattern was consistent and damning. 12 of the 16 had resigned, all within 30 days of hiring, all with brief and formulaic letters that gave no reason beyond personal circumstances or a vague reference to the position not being a good fit. 3 had gone on extended medical leave, stress, anxiety, unspecified, and HR notes indicated none of them had returned. The 16th file was thinner than the others, and the last page bore a note in clipped administrative language that I had to read twice before I understood what it was saying. Officer M. Delacroix. Commenced employment March 14th, 2022. Last active shift logged March 28th, 2022. Officer failed to clock out at end of shift. Security booth found vacant at 8 a.m. by day supervisor. Personal effects found at duty station. Entry to sub-level B3, access door found unsecured at time of discovery. Officer's whereabouts remain unconfirmed. File flagged. See incident report IR-2022-03-28. I looked for the incident report. There wasn't one in the cabinet. The reference was there. The document itself had been removed. I took photos of the file with my phone. I put everything back the way I'd found it. I left the HR office and completed my patrol and sat in the security booth for the remaining 3 hours of my shift, not touching my coffee, not putting in my earbud, watching the clock hands move. Officer M. Delacroix. Last seen March 28th, 2022. Entry to sub-level B3 access door found unsecured. The officer's whereabouts remain unconfirmed. I thought about Patricia Vane's words, the deliberate flatness of her delivery. Whatever you hear coming from sub-level 3, and you will hear things. She had known, she'd warned me the way someone warns you about a dangerous animal when there's no possibility of removing the animal, with pragmatic fatalism, trying to impart survival behavior without having to explain the full horror of what you were being asked to survive alongside. I thought about leaving. I genuinely considered it, sitting there in the security booth at 4 a.m. with the camera feeds cycling through their empty corridors. I could just not come back. I could file my own brief resignation letter, citing personal circumstances, and join the 12 before me. But Monsieur Delacroix hadn't come back from their shift at all. And something about that, about the idea that there was a person whose whereabouts were unconfirmed, who had disappeared from this building, from this job, and whose disappearance had apparently been absorbed into HR notation and filed away. Something about that wouldn't let me just walk out. I came back for shift 12. Shifts 12 and 13 were different from everything before. The sounds had changed again. They were no longer simply emanating from below. They were moving. On shift 12 at 1:17 a.m., the knocking began at Hecht, and I tracked it from the 4th floor as it shifted unmistakably from the deep sub-basement resonance I'd grown accustomed to upward. By 1:30 a.m., the sound felt like it was coming from B2. By 1:45 a.m., it felt like B1. By 2 a.m., it felt like the ground floor. Not the ground floor corridor where I was sitting, not that close, but the quality of the sound, the way it interacted with the building's acoustics, the surfaces it vibrated through, had changed in a way that was directionally unambiguous. Whatever was making these sounds was rising. I pulled up the B1 and B2 camera feeds and watched them with full attention for the first time. The corridors were empty, but there was something happening at the edge of the B1 East Corridor feed. A distortion, a quality to the air near the stairwell door that might have been a camera artifact or might have been something else. A shimmer, a density, like heat haze in a room that shouldn't be warm enough for it. On shift 13, the sound reached a new threshold. The voice-like modulation, the inflected toning I'd been hearing for days, resolved briefly and unmistakably into a word, one word, clearly pronounced, emerging from the low-frequency wash of sound like something surfacing from deep water. It said, "Help." I jerked backward from the corridor wall I'd been pressing my ear against and stood there in the B1 stairwell corridor for a long moment, breathing hard. The sound continued for another few minutes, cycling through its complex patterns, and the word did not recur, but it had been there. I had not misheard it. The word had been help, delivered in a tone that was both utterly alien in timbre and disturbingly, recognizably human in intent. Something was down there, something that had been trying to communicate for 2 weeks, with increasing sophistication and volume and clarity, and it had just managed to say the one word that it most needed me to hear. I came in on shift 14 with a plan. It wasn't a good plan. In retrospect, it was the plan of someone who had been sleep-deprived for 2 weeks and had crossed the line from frightened to compelled, the state where the fear doesn't go away, but it stops being the thing that governs your choices. I had brought a flashlight, heavier than the standard issue one, on my belt. I had brought my personal phone and a portable charger. I had brought a folding knife that I'd owned for years without ever using, which I put in my jacket pocket more as a talisman than a weapon. I did not have a key to the sub-level 3 access door. But at 1:05 a.m., when the knocking began louder than any previous night, loud enough now that I could hear it clearly from the security booth on the ground floor without pressing my ear to anything, I went down to B2 to look at the door. The stairwell was cold, colder than the upper floors. The fluorescent lighting buzzed and flickered in the way that institutional lighting has flickered in every dark building since the beginning of institutional lighting. But down here, it felt purposeful rather than incidental. As if the light was struggling, as if something was drawing on the same power that fed it. The sub-level 3 access door was a heavy steel fire door at the bottom of the B2 level. It was painted a dull red that had faded to a rust-orange color at the edges. A heavy magnetic lock was mounted on the frame, and a keypad was recessed into the wall beside it. Above the door, a hand-lettered sign on yellowing card read, "Authorized personnel only. No exceptions." I stood in front of it. The knocking on the other side was clear now, unmistakable, close. The floor vibrated with it beneath my feet. And then, just as I was standing there, just as I was beginning to feel the particular kind of terror that comes with certainty rather than speculation, the magnetic lock clicked. The indicator light on the keypad, which had been red, turned green. The door swung open 6 inches on its own. Cold air rushed out. Not the ambient chill of the stairwell, but something deeper. A cold that had weight and texture to it. The cold of places that have been sealed and forgotten. And with the cold came the smell. Earth, concrete, something chemical underneath. And beneath that, something organic that I couldn't identify and didn't want to. The knocking had stopped the moment the door opened. In the silence, from somewhere down below, because there were stairs beyond the door, I could see them in the beam of my flashlight, descending into absolute dark. I heard a voice, not the low-frequency modulation of previous nights. A voice, a human voice, thin and desperate and hoarse. The voice of someone who had been speaking into concrete walls for a very long time. "Please," it said. "Is someone there? Please. Can you hear me? Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you're watching from and whether your heart is pounding. We want to hear from every single one of you. And if you're not subscribed to Neurofear HQ yet, do it right now. This story is nowhere near over." I went through the door. I tell myself now that I had no choice. That when you hear a human voice asking for help from the dark, the calculus of self-preservation simply fails to compute. That might be true. It might also be that by that point, after 2 weeks of sound and escalation and the photograph of Monsieur Delacroix's HR file on my phone, I had been drawn too far in to turn back. The stairs beyond the door descended steeply, more steeply than building stairs typically do, as if sub-level 3 was substantially deeper than a standard basement floor, as if the building had been dug down here rather than simply built up there. There were 14 steps. I counted them as I descended, flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel of visibility through the dark. The sub-level 3 corridor was not what I expected. I had imagined, from Patricia's description, a decommissioned storage area, concrete shelves, old equipment and plastic sheeting, the mundane archaeology of institutional history. What I found instead was a laboratory, or what had once been a laboratory. The space was large, larger than the footprint of the floors above suggested it should be, which was a wrongness that I registered but didn't stop to analyze. The walls were lined with workstations bearing equipment I didn't recognize, banks of instrumentation with dark screens, cables and bundles along the walls, the skeletons of what might have been sensory apparatus or might have been something else. Everything was old. Everything was filmed with the particular dust of disuse. But the layout was deliberate and purposeful, and not the layout of a storage space. At the far end of the room was a door, heavy, steel, not a fire door, something purpose-built, with thick rubber seals around the frame and a wheel lock, mechanism like a submarine hatch. And from behind it, that voice. Hello? Hello? I can hear footsteps. Someone's there, please. I crossed the room. My flashlight swept across the workstations, the equipment, the walls. In one corner, I saw a cot, a folding army cot with a mylar blanket on it. Near the cot, empty water bottles in a cluster, a bucket with a lid, which I understood the purpose of and did not look at for long. The remnants of food packaging, carefully stacked. Someone had been living down here, or someone had been kept down here. I reached the door. I'm here, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger, it thin and high, performing a calm it didn't feel. Who's there? Are you okay? A sound from the other side, a gasping, raw sound that was relief and grief tangled together. Oh God, the voice said. Oh God. They said no one would come. They said... It broke off. Who are you? Are you security? Are you new? My name is Daniel. I'm the night security officer. Who are you? What's happening? A pause. A very long pause. Long enough that I thought the voice might have receded again, retreated back into whatever state it had emerged from. My name is Marcus, it finally said. Marcus Delacroix. I've been down here for another pause. I don't know how long. I've lost track. The lights don't change. They took my phone. I've been trying to make noise. I've been trying for so long. Marcus Delacroix. Monsieur Delacroix. Last active shift logged March 28th, 2022. I looked at the wheel lock. My hands were shaking. I gripped the wheel and tried to turn it. It moved. Stiffly, with the resistance of long disuse. But it moved. The lock, Marcus said from the other side. Is it the wheel? Turn it counterclockwise. Counterclockwise, then pull. I turned it. My shoulders ached with the effort. The rubber seals broke their adhesion with a sound like a gasp, and the door swung outward. The space beyond was small, perhaps 3 meters by 4. A room within a room. The walls were bare concrete. There was a cot like the one in the outer laboratory, an IV stand. No bag on it, just the stand. And a man. He was sitting on the floor with his back to the door, and he turned when I opened it. And the sight of him was enough to drive every remaining question out of my mind and replace it with a single, overwhelming urgency. Marcus Delacroix was alive. He was thin in the way of someone who had been inadequately fed for a very long time. His face was pale with a pallor that went beyond mere vitamin deficiency. The pallor of someone who had not seen sunlight in months. His beard was long and unkempt. His eyes, when they met mine in the beam of the flashlight, were red-rimmed and wet, and so fully alive with desperation and gratitude that it was physically difficult to look at. But he was alive. Can you walk? I asked. I don't know, he said honestly. I haven't tried in a while. A pause. They brought food and water every few days. Until about a week ago. They stopped. Can you try? He tried. He made it to the door with the help of my arm. In the outer laboratory, under the better sweep of my flashlight, he stopped and looked around. I always wondered what was out here, he said quietly. What is this place? I asked. He looked at the equipment. He looked at the walls. He looked at the workstations with their dark screens. I'm not completely sure, he said. They didn't explain. They just... He stopped. The sounds. Did you hear sounds? Yes. Starting on my 7th shift. That's why I'm here. Something moved across his face. That was me. I've been trying since the beginning. Knocking. Using my voice, trying everything. I thought... He exhaled shakily. I thought no one would ever hear, or that they'd hear and follow the rules. He looked at me then, steadily and with an expression I recognized. "You were told not to investigate," he said. "Yes. But you came anyway." "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if this answered something he'd been wondering about for a very long time. "Come on," I said. "We need to get out of here now, and then we need to call the police." Getting Marcus to the stairs took longer than I'd hoped. He could walk, but unsteadily. His legs had weakened over the months of confinement, and the stairs were steep. I went up first with his hand on my shoulder, and we climbed them together slowly, the flashlight beam swinging, the cold of sub-level 3 gradually giving way to the regular cold of the building. We came through the access door into the B2 stairwell, and I turned to pull the door shut behind us. Standing in the stairwell, at the base of the stairs leading up to B1, was Patricia Vane. She was wearing a heavy overcoat over what appeared to be pajamas, which told me she'd been called in, which told me the building had detected the open door, or the motion on the stairs, or some alarm I'd triggered that I hadn't known about. She looked exactly as she had when I'd met her, precise, economical, controlled. Only her eyes gave her away, a sharpness behind them that could have been anger or could have been something else, something worse. She looked at Marcus. She looked at me. She said very calmly, "Mr. Marsh, put him back." I felt Marcus's hand tighten on my arm. "I'm calling the police," I said. "No," she said. "You won't." She stepped forward. "You have no idea what you've involved yourself in. The research being conducted here has government authorization. Mr. Delacroix signed a consent form. Everything done here has been..." He signed a consent form to be locked in a room for over 2 years? My voice had found something harder than fear, something useful. Where he lost track of time, where they stopped bringing him food? A flicker. She hadn't expected me to know about the food. There was a miscommunication, a scheduling error. "I'm calling the police," I said. Again. She reached into her coat pocket. My hand went to my jacket pocket where the folding knife was. We stood there in the stairwell for a moment that stretched. What she took out of her coat pocket was a phone. Not a weapon. A phone. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus. Then she looked at me. And something in her face shifted. Just slightly, just a fraction. Towards something that might have been human. She put the phone back in her pocket. "The elevator," she said in a different voice. Flat and defeated and somehow smaller. "It's faster." She stepped aside. We went up in the elevator in silence. In the lobby, I walked Marcus to the main entrance. I pushed through the door. The night outside was cold and clear, and the city was still, and around us was the reality of the outside world, the cars and the street lights and the distance we'd covered. I called 911 from my personal phone the moment we were through the door. Patricia Vane did not follow us outside. I'll tell you what happened next in the broad terms, because the specifics remain complicated by the ongoing nature of what followed. The police came, an ambulance came. Marcus Delacroix was taken to a hospital, treated for malnutrition and the accumulated effects of prolonged isolation, and is, to the best of my knowledge, as of the time I'm recording this, recovering. And now he has people around him now. He is being cared for. That is what matters most. The Harlow Institute was sealed. There were investigators, more than just local police, which confirmed for me that Patricia Vane had not been lying about government authorization, though that authorization is now under the very harsh light of formal inquiry. Several people were detained. Patricia Vane was among them, I was questioned for a very long time. I gave them my documentation. I gave them my shift reports. I gave them the photographs I'd taken of the HR file. What I was told in careful and heavily qualified terms is that Sublevel 3 had been the site of what was described as long-term sensory and environmental research that had allegedly been conducted on consenting subjects. What constituted genuine consent, under what pressure it had been obtained, and whether the conditions of the research had materially departed from what subjects had agreed to. These are matters still being determined. What I know, from what I witnessed, from what Marcus told me in those raw minutes in the stairwell and in the hours after, is simpler. A man was locked in a room below a building where I worked. He had been there for so long that he'd lost count of the months. He had survived on what little they brought him and had spent his time doing the only thing available to him, trying to be heard, trying to make enough sound to reach the floors above, through the concrete and the distance, to reach whoever might be listening. And for 2 weeks before I came, 7 other security guards had come and gone on their patrols. They had heard the sounds, they had felt the vibrations in the floors, they had maybe paused, listened, felt something wrong in their chest, and they had done what they were told to do. They had ignored the noises. I don't know what that cost them. I don't know how they sleep. I don't know what they tell themselves. What I know is that I couldn't. I don't work in security anymore. I'm not sure what I'll do next. Right now, I'm focused on the statement I've been asked to provide to the inquiry, which has turned out to be a much larger document than I anticipated, and on making sure that what happened at the Harlow Institute reaches the public record clearly and completely. I've been thinking about what it means to be told to ignore something. How easy it is when an authority figure gives you a pragmatic, plausible reason to look away. How the economy of a working life, the rent, the need, the daily transactions of staying employed, creates such an efficient engine for not asking questions that need to be asked. Patricia Vane in the stairwell said that Marcus had signed a consent form, and maybe he had. But consent has limits. Consent has conditions. Consent is not a document you sign once and then surrender forever, through locked doors and sealed rooms, while someone outside your prison is paid above market wages specifically to ignore the sound of you. If you work somewhere and you're told to ignore something, a sound, a smell, a closed door, a face you see and then don't see again, I'm not saying throw your life into chaos. I'm not saying martyr yourself, but I am saying write it down. Ask the question out loud. So at least it's been asked. Pay attention to the thing they're paying you not to pay attention to, because whatever is making that noise, whatever it is that they don't want you to see, it might be nothing, or it might be everything. My name is Daniel Marsh. I was a night security guard. I was for 19 days, and I couldn't ignore the noises. And that is where Daniel Marsh's account ends. Whether you believe every detail of his story is entirely up to you. But I'll tell you this, the part that gets me every single time I read it is not the creature in the basement, not the locked door, not even the woman in the stairwell. It's the other 12 security guards. The 12 who heard the sounds, the 12 who felt the vibrations in the floors, the 12 who saw the covered elevator button and the strip of red tape and the building that paid above market wages for a night job, and who did what they were told, clocked out at 6 a.m. and went home. We'd all like to think we'd be Daniel. We'd all like to think we'd go through the door. but the numbers say otherwise. And that, right there, is what makes this terrifying. Not the monster in the dark. The ordinary person who walks past it because someone told them to. Sleep well tonight, Neurofear family. If you can, smash that like button if this story crawled under your skin. Comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. We are reading every single comment, every single one. Subscribe to Neurofear HQ. Hit the bell icon for all notifications so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to lose some sleep tonight. We post new horror stories every week. The next one is already written. You don't want to miss it. Welcome to Neurofear headquarters. You're one of us now.